Here we are again, folks. Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. So proud to be with you today. Do you know that we started out in the book of Romans a while back, and we were talking about the Gentile being grafted in to a Jewish God. God is the God of all people, but He chose the Jewish people to be His special people. Well, they rejected Him, so He's grafting in the Gentile. What is a Gentile? A Gentile is anybody who's not a Jew. If you're not a Jew, you are a Gentile. And that's just the way it is. And so, at Romans chapter 11, we looked at last time we were in here, and we concluded the section of that book which dealt with the sovereignty of God over Israel. Now, He was sovereign over Israel. That means He had 100% total control over Israel. Now in chapter 12, we're going to enter into the fourth and final section of Romans that deals with service. And service is the most important thing with God. God requires service. He requires servitude if you're going to follow Him. Before we start the Romans 12, though, let's look at something. There's a few verses in chapter 11 that can be seen to serve as a capstone of the past book. From 1 through 11, we need to put a capstone on it, like you would a well. You dig a well, you put a capstone on it so nothing else will fall in it. And so it's pure, and it'll stay pure and keep clean. Now we're going to cap off 11, where we have looked at the doctrines of salvation. We looked at sanctification and Israel. Now, salvation, sanctification, and Israel, three different things, but they all stemmed from one. We'll begin with the letter of those verses, the latter of those verses. First, in Romans 11:25, notice the phrase, the fullness of the Gentiles. Understand, this phrase will help us to understand more fully the things that we studied in chapter 9 through 11. As we studied through 9 through 11, if you'll back up in some of the ones before now, you'll find out that we were in that 9 through 11 deal. And we studied that. And so here we are, winding up, coming into 12. Now we're concerned with our time, the time in which we live. We learn, laugh, we weep, we play, we do the things that we do. But God has a broader view of time. And the time in which we live and learn and laugh and weep, but God has a broader view of time. Now, one day is 1,000 years with the Lord. And 1,000 years is as but one day with God. God lives above time. I've said before 100 times, God didn't need air. He made air for you and I. He didn't need all the things that we have. He doesn't need the vegetation. He made that for us and the animals. He doesn't need anything He made for us. He made us for His pleasure. And He made the birds for His pleasure. He made the animals for His pleasure in the sense of the word. He made them to keep the earth properly, being turned over and going right and everything, so it wouldn't grow up and cover all over again. God lives above time. In His view of time as a whole, all of human history contained His purpose and plan. Note that right there. The purpose and plan of God. That's the most important thing that's going to enter into your life as a human being, the purpose and plan of God. And all of human history is merely a speck in God's eternity. So far, what we've had, so let's just say, this is 2017, okay? So we'll say that. That's 2017 years. That's a speck in the eye of God. We're trying to hurry Him to come on the scene in a hurry. Well, He's not going to come until the time is right. When it's right, He's going to come. We can see the signs of the time happening and getting ready for Him to come. Of course, God loves us. Of course, He cares for us. He numbers a hair on our head. He knows the number of every hair on this old gray head. And he knows it's gray, by the way. But our time is just a very brief segment of his time. And that is what verse 25 refers to. Now, let me tell you a little something. I'm 75. By the time I'm 80, 81, maybe 80, 81, I'm prepping right now, making preparation. So the time I'm 80, 81, God will allow me to go on the road. I'd love to go on the road. I'd love to cross this country. I'd love to preach in little churches from here to Maine, from Georgia to Maine, all the way through. Just little churches, little churches, little churches. And do that. I'd love to have a trek all the way through and stop at this one and have the travel time be from that one to another one and do that. And go through and do that. If God would allow me to do that. What is the phrase fullness? Is used in a reference to time in one form or another. At least 3 times in the Word of God, there are 3 full times in God's calendar. God fulfilled 3 times in his calendar. Listen to this. The time of Christ, Galatians 4:4. Why was Jesus born when he was born? Early or later? Why was he not born in Abraham's day or in David's day? According to Galatians 4:4, was because the fullness of time was not yet come. Everything has a fullness of time. Now, God knows my story from the end to the beginning. He knows your story from the end to the beginning. And there is going to be a fullness of time in my life. I don't know when it's going to be, but God does. And he puts in my mind the studying and the plans and the things that he may have me do. And I'm believing in all my heart that he's going to have me do something before I die that would win souls. I don't want to go preach to every little church from here to Maine for no special reason other than to see souls won. I don't want to leave behind anywhere where there's not a soul won. When I pull into a gas station while we're traveling, if the Lord preserves my wife and we get to go together, and I want to pull into a station while I'm fueling up the old wagon, I want to be able to win somebody to the Lord. I want to be able to be a soul winner. Listen, I am in school. I am studying theology. I am going to have a degree. But that's not worth a hill of beans if I'm not an active Christian in the spiritual sense of winning souls to the Lord. To go out, and by the way, I'm not a debater and I'm not going to debate. The fact's the fact. Jesus came and died on the cross that you and I might have salvation. And if you're asking to forgive you of your sin, come in your heart, you got it. Let's get that next point up here. All right. The next point is the establishment and the construction of the town of Bethlehem was the last prophecy through the prophet Malachi. And that was, and 400 years later, the voice of the forerunner, John the Baptist, which was proclaimed 400 years later he would come, to name a few, then came the night that changed the world. Christ was born. Why now? Because the time of his birth was full. Do you know I had a man who claims to be an agnostic say to me, you know, there must have been something about that Jesus. He changed the calendar for him. All of the world dates start with him, the day he was born. Yeah, there was something about him. He was the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the only potentate. And he was it. Every moment of Jesus' life was made in perfect obedience to the Father's timetable. His teaching in the temple at age 12, his first miracle at Canaan, the offer of himself to the Jewish nation, his death on the cross, all in accordance with the Father's will. And according to Matthew 24:36, his return will take place when God says the time is right. One of these days he's going to say the time is right. The trump's going to sound. And he's going to say, come out hither. And all of us who have asked him to forgive us our sin, come in our heart and save us soul, will go to be with him immediately. at that point in time. Now, let's look at the time of the Gentiles in Luke 21 and 24. Let's keep in mind that the mind of God now of Israel, and the most important place in the world to God in history, is important only as it relates to Israel. Now, you and I have no idea, none. We can't fathom in our wildest thought what it is that God has in Israel. I've been there, visited it in 1973, and went around there. And to me, it was an arthritic place. All of the rocks and the stones and the, what I felt like bothered me was the humidity of it, and then the heat and the day and the cool of the night. And listen, to an American, it's not a comfortable place to be. Unless you go to one of the fancy hotels that are there for Americans, built on American style and built for American luxury. The average person in that area does not live in American luxury. They still live in the old stone places with the fireplaces, with all of the stuff. And now I know there are two hierarchies over there. There are the poor, and then there's the hierarchy, and they still treated the same over there. In 586 BC, Jerusalem and Judea are carried captive by Babylon. This began in the time of the Gentiles. This is the period of the time which Gentile nations would dominate Israel. Up until then, it was all Jews. Jews lived in Israel, not Gentiles. Gentiles were dogs. Gentiles were outside of the city. They were considered dogs. And when a Jewish person married an outsider, they kicked him out of the city. And that's what the Samaritan was in Samaria. They were half-breed Jews. They were, and by the way, God chose some half-breed Jews to follow him as disciples. Let's look on. Judah was taken captive in 586 BC. 70 years, a remnant returned unto Ezra and Nehemiah in 70 AD. Jerusalem was destroyed again by the Roman general Titus. Since that time, Jerusalem has been trodden down of the Gentiles. Luke 21:24. Let me tell you a little something. They outsiders that came and Titus came and destroyed Jerusalem. He was hunting between every rock. He heard that when they built the walls, that they put gold in between them and set the rocks down on it. And he went all the way to the bottom looking for that gold. Israel became a nation in 1948. But Jerusalem is still under complete Jewish control. Why? Because the time of the Gentiles is not yet full. Note, there is a difference between the time of the Gentiles in Luke 21:24 and the fullness of the Gentiles, Romans 11:25. This word times in italics is physical and worldly, and the fullness is spiritual and heavenly. Two different complete statements, two complete different things. Israel, as we have seen, has been temporarily set aside while Christ called out the Gentile bride. What is the Gentile bride? This is the church. Now, if you are a Jewish person and you believe in Jesus Christ, you say, I believe Jesus died for me on the cross, and he will save me if I ask him to forgive me, and he will, then you become, as a Gentile, you're part of the church. And there are many Jews today who are part of the church. Few, but there are a few. All right, heavenly Israel, as we see, has been temporarily set aside for the Gentile bride, the church. One day, the last Gentile will be saved in the church age. When that happens, the catching away will take place. Why? Because the bride is complete and the fullness of the Gentile has come. The catching away is when Jesus comes in the cloud and says, come up hither, and the church goes up. However, when we read Revelation 19, 15 through 16, we see that Christ will smite the nation of Armageddon on the day and the time of the Gentiles, will be fulfilled, and Israel will again rule their land and receive the blessing and promise of God. This is one of the primary teachings of the book of Romans now in chapter 11. But there is a third time. Wow. Let's consider it. Let's take a look at it. The dispensation of the fullness of time in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 10. There was a fullness of time for Christ. There was a fullness of time for the Gentile. And Ephesians, there is a fullness time for a dispensation. What is a dispensation? A dispensation is a period of time that was set apart for a specific reason. And this reason was to be fulfilled, and God fulfilled it. Simply put, God is moving everything forward to a time when all things are brought under the rule of Jesus Christ. All things will be fulfilled, all time will be full, and Christ will rule forever. Wow. Well, this is going to be a little short 15, 16 minute excerpt right here. I thank the Lord for allowing us to breeze on through it, and I'll plan on seeing you the next time. Bye-bye.